I want to talk about a little bit of the why and how people develop skills. I think we all agree that we need a skilled workforce. I want to argue that caring about interests might help us accomplish that. So interests meaning what is it that people like to do? What is it that they would choose to do if they had their druthers? Interests are a bit underappreciated and they've gone in and out of favor over the years. But I'm going to show some research today that suggests they can actually add some of that puzzle back in to figure out who pursues various skills and how they do that. To orient us, I've got a video that I want to share with, so please enjoy.
My name is Otis. I'm a junior at the Chicago High School for Agricultural Sciences. I'm in Ag MechTech. That's my pathway. We go through drafting and applied mechanics and technology to get a feel for the working environment and preparing us for our career goals, really.
He's a student that takes advantage of the opportunities that are available.
I want to be a mechanical engineer. Anything that has to do with mechanics, really, or technology, because technology is really evolving in our world, so I want to be somebody that can advance our world and make it better. Let's start and make sure that everybody's on task, nobody's left behind. My parents can't be here while I'm here, and so having that other parental figures here also is basically heartwarming. I signed up for an internship at U of I, sponsored by Tyson. Our project was basically to explore the food chain and how our food gets from the farm to the plate. For our project, we made bratwurst. We were measuring different levels of fat and different levels of sodium, and basically measuring the consumer likability. We also had the opportunity to take it to Arkansas, where their headquarters is, and present it to them, and they actually liked it. The opportunities here is amazing. It's something that you will rarely see in another school.
Chicago Ag, who's taken my child and developed him to the point where they're saying, okay, I'm pushing you out so that you are seen by this school and that school and that school, is, I believe, giving him a leg up when he gets ready to apply for college next year.
This school basically helps make sure that your future is successful.
So Otis is a student at the Chicago High School for the Agricultural Sciences. It's the last farm in Chicago. It's in the South Side. And the kids that go there are just regular kids from Chicago. They're not necessarily gifted and talented. They're not coming from the 1%. But this school is really unusual in terms of how it fosters interests in unusual subject areas. I met Otis as part of a larger study that was exploring how innovative high schools like this encourage interest in STEM. At Chicago Ag, they have 5 career pathways. They have horticulture, food science, animal science, agricultural economics, and then mechanical technology, which is what Otis studies. And these tracks, as you heard Otis describe, give kids an insight, a real insight into what it's like to do these jobs. The horticulture kids grow zucchini, and then the food science kids make zucchini bread, and then the economics kids sell it at the farmer's market, and they really get a picture of every step of the way of these industries. Skills, we know, come from ongoing involvement in an activity. You can't develop a skill unless you practice it, you do it a lot, you get feedback about what goes right, what goes wrong. You screw up, you figure out where the boundaries are. Right? If you exit that process too soon, you don't develop the skills. Interest is what keeps you involved in these activities. So interests lead directly to skills. The model for how this works, I'll just walk through it very quickly, is fairly simple. You start with your personal traits, your educational background, your economic background. We heard a lot this morning about how this can work. And those early characteristics directly determine the experiences that you have. Okay, so it's either a very rich experience or a very impoverished experience. And this is how you figure out what might be interesting to you. You try out different experiences and you like them or you don't like them. Those interests are actually key because what they do is determine your goals and your choices. They determine what future target you aim for and the choices that you make about persisting when things get difficult or seeking out additional feedback. We hear a lot about these 21st century skills like resilience and persistence. Those come from interest, right? It's easier to persist in something when you find it interesting. Okay? And those goals and choices lead to skills. The nice thing about this model, or the negative thing about the model, is that there's also a feedback loop here, right? So that as you develop skills, it reinforces your interest, or it doesn't, depending on how that process goes for you. So we know this model operates this way. We know that interests are really the key that keep people engaged in those pathways that will help them develop skills. Okay. In order to think about how interests work, I'm going to rely on a pretty classic model. This is a model from Holland. It's been around for a long time. It's a little bit oversimplified for communication purposes, but I think it will suffice. So we can think about what vocational interests exist according to this 6-factor typology. So the first category would be realistic or doers. These are people that like to work with their hands and fix things. And it could be something like construction, or it could be building a robot. The next category is investigative or thinkers. These are people who like to analyze data or ask questions about ideas. I imagine there are a lot of people who are high in that interest area in here. Artists or creators are the third category, people who like to do performances or create with creative expression. The fourth category is social or helpers. This is people who would describe themselves as people, right? If you enjoy interacting with other people. Enterprising or persuaders are people who are interested in business, so if you like sales. And then finally, conventional. These are people who are high in attention to detail and who like planning and like organizing. Okay. So this model has been around for a long time again, and it's been very well validated over the years. However, it's not just about interests. It's actually about the fit between what interests you and what the job requires. And that's really the key. And so it's not just enough to be interested in something. It also needs to be the case that your interests line up with job requirements. And so we can think about fit like this. So imagine that you have some value on various career interests, and then the job also requires some amount of those interests. And your fit is the discrepancy between those quantities. And we'd add them up to understand how well you fit with a job. Fit is important. This is not a fluffy concept. You know, the idea of ROI has come up multiple times. We can think about the consequences of fit on individuals and organizations, and they're actually quite important. So at the least severe level, people who don't fit with their job will end up engaging less and devoting less effort to the job. And so if you care about money, there have been estimates that cyberloafing or goofing around on your computer at work lead to $85 billion worth of wasted money every year. So this isn't just a trivial sort of thing. Going down the list of severity, people who don't fit experience more frustration, burnout, and stress. And so again, these have individual consequences and then also organizational consequences. People are not coming into work as often if they're experiencing stress and health problems. People who don't fit might choose a different career path entirely, or quit, or leave, or exit the workforce entirely. And it's also been shown that fit leads to negative actions like theft and sabotage. So if you're wondering who's stealing all the office supplies, it might be the person who feels like they don't fit with the organization. So if we're trying to accomplish more fit, we can think about how to get to that place. Theoretically, more information about the job requirements should lead to better decisions and better fit. So information is one piece of it. Second, more opportunity to develop interests should also contribute to fit. The idea is that if you have no experiences, you don't have a chance to develop any interests, and so any job you choose won't match you. K12 schools like Chicago Agriculture can foster interest in careers. As part of this study I mentioned, I visited a number of these different high schools and came up with a few themes for how fit and career interests can be cultivated. The first way is with interactions with STEM professionals. So this might mean that a real bona fide engineer comes to judge the science fair and you get to interact with an engineer. Or it could mean that your robotics club is advised by someone who understands robotics and works in a robotics field. Or, in my favorite example, it could mean that in your biology lab, when you're working on a lab about, say, how leaves work, and you run into a problem, you get on Skype and you call a real live biologist and you ask them a question about how leaves work and what they might think. And so the schools in my study were able to take advantage of all these connections with STEM professionals. The other way is by fostering close connections with industry, and this is very important. It's much easier to develop an interest in a field when you see how it connects to a career pathway that might be interesting to you. So on the photo on the left, people from Chicago agriculture are working in Eli's Cheesecake, which is a large Chicago area cheesecake company, and they're using chemistry to figure out the right ratios of ingredients. They're also developing their artistic interests by thinking up new recipes and their enterprising interests. So it's not just about STEM. On the right, those are kids from Manor New Tech High School in Austin, Texas, and they're working with Samsung. And so the kids here are going down to see how wafers are manufactured, and they're having a race to put on the clean suits, and they're running around, and they're understanding more about what it means to work in that setting. I think it's really important to ask, though, whether there are socioeconomic differences in terms of who has a job that fits them. Is fit a privilege? The schools I described are really unusual in that they are publicly funded high schools that are able to do these kinds of creative things with regular kids. For most kids, the things that they're exposed to are very narrow. And if there isn't a TV show about it, they haven't heard of it, they haven't aspired to it. So the smart kids in a lot of neighborhoods only know about doctors and lawyers because there are TV shows about doctors and lawyers, and it would never occur to them to pursue some of these other career tracks. So this is a serious problem. I worked on a study to explore this issue a little bit more in a more quantitative way. And to do so, I started with Ownit. So you might be familiar with Ownit. It is a Department of Labor database about the content of over 980 jobs. It's conducted by a probability sample, meaning they call up people doing various jobs and ask them, what is it you do here, right? And they try to find out what are the knowledges, skills, abilities, interests that might be relevant. One of the things that Ownit collects is about vocational interests. And so here's an example about biomedical engineers. And it says that biomedical engineers are high in investigative interests, and they're high in realistic interests. And so I started with that. I started with that database of what the common interests were for these various professions. And again, the way they find this out is they ask a biomedical engineer, how important is it for someone in this job to have investigative interests? And at what level do they really need to have those interests? Is a mild interest okay, or do you really need to be passionate about it? So the database has these scores for 980 jobs. The second thing I did was partner with Time Magazine, who was very generous in building a fun online quiz about find out what job best matches your personality. And so they put this link on their website, and I'll just walk through what the quiz looks like for you quickly. So the first thing that you see is fill out your gender and age and your education and your income, and then it asks you, are you currently employed? If you are employed, then down at the bottom there it says, what's your job? If you said you weren't employed, it would say, what's your dream job? What's the job that you're aspiring to? And then you take a vocational interest survey, 30 items like this. So how much would you like to seat patrons at a restaurant, oversee a hotel, prepare financial reports, and so on. At the end, it gives you some feedback. It says, your personality is an ideal match for the job of forest and conservation technician. And then what it does is show you what the profile of someone with that job looks like and what your profile looks like. And so you can get some feedback about how well it lines up. And incidentally, the survey is still live. If anyone wants to find out what their ideal job is, you can follow that link. The other really important part of the survey was that you could use this drop-down menu at the top to try out a few different other jobs to see how they might line up too. So it gives you 5 jobs to choose from. So we launched this survey, and within 2 weeks, 70,000 people took the survey, which was great, and from all over the world. 30,000 from the US and 70,000 total. Of those 70,000, 50,000 were from the US. And so I used this data set, again, combining it with information from Ownit, to understand who fits with their job. Okay. The first thing I looked at was gender and age. And I saw that very young people and people who are past retirement age don't fit very well, and people in the middle fit better. And this makes sense if we think about the kinds of decisions that are available to 20-year-olds compared to 40-year-olds, compared to 60-year-olds. Right? It's more likely that someone in middle age would be in a job that suited their interests, or that their interests changed as a result of their work experiences. Right? One of those two things is true. The colors represent gender, and so the lighter blue is men and the darker blue is women, and there were not major gender differences here. The second way I split this data was by education level. And here you see that the more education you have, the more likely it is that you'll be in a job that fits you. Okay? And this should not be surprising. Again, it's either the interests shape you or you shape the interests, but certainly more education is better here. I think something that's interesting is if you look at the line for women, it's doing slightly better than men until you get to a postgraduate degree, and then all of a sudden you take a dip. Okay. So that's a finding I want to come back to because I think it's really important. The next thing I looked at was fit by job code category. So Ownit is organized by SOC codes that are provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you can see that the best fitting jobs were computers and math, education, healthcare practitioners, that's doctors and dentists. And some of the worst fitting jobs were in production, farming, food prep, building and maintenance. And I've got at least 5,000 people from each of these categories, so these are relatively reliable estimates. However, there's probably a lot of variation within industry, right? For example, the job of life, physical, and social science includes both economists and zoologists. And if you like working outside and working with your hands, then zoologist will obviously be more attractive to you. So the next thing I did was split this out by specific job title instead of industry. So here are the best fitting jobs. Urban planners, technical directors, film editors, accountants, economists, HR specialists, art and music teachers. If there's any theme here, it's that there's a lot of social science and artistic jobs here. That people are choosing those kinds of jobs maybe because they love doing those things and not because they think they'll make a ton of money. The worst fitting jobs are all service jobs. So waiters, receptionists, inspectors, fast food workers, these are all of the people that have interests that don't align with their job. However, it's not because these jobs are inherently uninteresting. Let me show you quickly the worst fitting jobs. So here's waitress and sales, two of the worst fitting jobs. It's not like they have nothing to contribute, right? They're very high in enterprising values and reasonably high in social. However, they're very low in artistic and investigative interests. And these are the kinds of things we tell people they should care about. We tell young people that they should be thinkers and scientists and creators, and that these are the things that aren't automatable. And so if we're developing those kinds of interests at the expense of others, it makes sense that this would be the case. I was also curious about whether this could help us understand STEM career pursuits specifically, because I do have an interest in this area. I split this up by gender, and I know this is too small to read, but I want to just show you the shape of these two graphs. So this is the shape for men, so you can see there's some jobs that fit well, some jobs that don't fit well. Web developers fit very, very well. Medical scientists fit not so great. But then watch the shape of the graph for women. There's much fewer high-fitting jobs for women, and the order changed. So web developers are now neutral, and so are medical scientists. So what this means is that the women doing these jobs are experiencing less fit. Okay. This is some data from the Georgetown Center on Education and Workforce about the top most popular majors and the jobs that have the highest and lowest unemployment. And I want to use this just as a quick example. So psychology, my chosen field, is one of the most popular majors and also has the most unemployment. In contrast Geological engineering and pharmacology are among the least popular majors, but have the highest employment rates. So the question on the table for me is, why would someone pick psychology instead of pharmacology, right? And I think we can use interests to understand that question. And so here are the interest profiles for pharmacology and psychology, and you see actually that they're quite similar in almost every respect except for that realistic dimension, which has to do with working with your hands. So it's not the case that psychologists are people and pharmacologists are somehow different qualitatively, right? They're minor differences. And I think these differences represent perceptions versus reality. When young people say, I want to help people for their job, then they think of things like social worker or teacher. But they don't think of math teacher necessarily. And math teachers are also people, right? We also help. My point here is that what we emphasize matters. That interests are actually very malleable, and those experiences people have do affect the interests that they develop, and we can do a better job of developing a broad range of interests for people. I know I'm running short on time, but just one example of how those interests can be shaped is an organization that I work with called Skills USA and World Skills. So this is a worldwide organization that hosts skills competitions in 100 different skilled trade areas. And so here they're competing in electronics. Here's another example of the welding competition, which is a lot of fun to watch. But it's not just about traditional vo-tech. Here's welding the sculpture. This young lady made this sculpture using nothing but welding material, which just is fascinating to me. And the thing that's noteworthy about these competitions is that they really build pride. That people who compete think of themselves as champions, they're developing leadership, and they're developing teamwork skills. And they're doing it while developing a skilled trade. So when you go to the World Skills website, you'll see what kinds of skills are you interested in. If you choose working as a team, it might direct you to digital game art, which might not be the thing you were thinking of when you said you liked working in a team. But it turns out that that competition requires you to collaborate with other people to develop a game. Again, there are 100 skills competition areas. Here are the specs for the robotics challenge. It tells you that competitors need to program a robot, but then also make some technical documentation to go along with it and present it to other people. So we're hoping to replicate the time survey that I told you about with this group of people to better understand how skills develop. And with my last minute, I do just want to note that there might be a risk in developing interest too much and emphasizing interest too much. As you know, there are all sorts of personality quizzes online, right, that will tell you what sort of donut you are or whatever else. And I think there's a risk in terms of telling someone that you are X. It limits their imagination. And rather, I would suggest fostering a broad range of interests for people and making sure that they have those experiences so that they can adapt to changing environments and embrace new skills as they become relevant. And so I'll stop there. Thank you.